how to actually negotiate, and do they know why they should? And what you're bringing up is more the why piece, the whole like mindset. A lot of people are very confident and bullish and think they're, worth certain amounts. They're going to go and be ballsy and ask for that. Other people are the opposite of that, and it takes a while to be comfortable in that. And with the whole like why, there's a lot of fear. It's like a lot of people think, why should I even negotiate a job offer? Like, why don't I just take the first one? They don't want to seem greedy, or they're worried they're going to lose the opportunity. And the reality is just like none of that is true. It's incredibly rare that an offer is going to break down at the offer stage.
Welcome to the Rising Leader Podcast, bringing forth the new wave of rising leadership and helping leaders find purpose, connection, and results. This is your host, founder of Alluviance, Alex Kremer. What is up, y'all? Welcome back to this episode of the Rising Leader Podcast. If this is your first time joining us on the show, we welcome you. We are so grateful for you to be here. As always, this is your host, Alex Kremer, and I am particularly excited about today's guest. We have the incredibly intelligent, sophisticated, looking good, Mr. Devon Hennig. First off, Devon, what's up, brother?
Blushing over here. Hey, Alex, how you doing? What's good?
Oh, man. It's we haven't had someone like you on the show before.
A Canadian?
And so this is, you might be the first Canadian. I feel like we've had to have
oh my God. I hope my accent doesn't trip people up. I hope like my boots and shores and tomorrows aren't too much. We'll see.
You know what? We probably just had about 30 to 40 people who are listening right now just like exit out of this show and just say,
that Canada up there, that 51st state, we're not going.
Oh no, we welcome you. You're part of us. But Devon, I'm gonna give you a little bit of introduction here, and I'm gonna let you fill in the blanks for anything that I missed.
Sure.
So Devon, you are the author of 8 best-selling books, 2 of which includes the Senior Compensation Bible and How to Be VP, as well as you are the host of the popular TikTok channel Boardroom Confidential, where you are sharing essentially compensation and career advice for executives and other senior leaders. In addition to that, you've got about 10 years or more of leading marketing teams at both private and public companies. When you started, I love that he says, you had no idea how to negotiate senior job offers and literally left millions of dollars on the table. And so that is one of the reasons why you started.
It's so sad. I don't know why you're smiling, because very painful.
There's so many people who resonate with the problem that you're trying to solve for, of like, cool, my whole job is just try to get a job, but then whole other ballpark of how do I make sure that I'm maximizing, whether you're a senior leader or even whether you're just a sales rep. It's just like, how do I make sure that I'm getting the best offer here? And it's, in a way, it's like a massive black box of like, man, I don't know. What am I missing?
No one
here?
teaches you. Like, you just learn by mistake. And that is such a shame. It's just trash. So that's what I'm trying to fix. That's what I'm out here trying to fix, Alex. We'll see.
Okay. One other random fact that you may have casually dropped this in on a previous note to us, you are a former game show host, which is just like, I mean, when you tossed that random fact in there, I was like, okay, Devon, like, was not expecting that.
That feels like a separate life. That's a totally different podcast, like the game show podcast. But
all right, that'll be part 2.
That's right. No, that's probably the best job I've ever had as a game show host. But I mean, let's say it didn't quite pay the bills for a long time. We'll move into tech after that.
So let's start here, Devon. I think, hopefully this is going to be a powerful episode for people, not just to learn how to, the tips and tricks on how to negotiate a better compensation, but just really like both the tactical, but also the mindset ways about going about it. So just to kind of take it like, step 1 is like, how do you even become a negotiation / compensation expert? Like what so to speak gives you the right to be able to teach and share all this information?
I mean, 2 things. number one, maybe it's just the admiration piece. Like I would say I admire good negotiators. I study them. I read a lot. I, feel like I was not born that way. Like a lot of people, this isn't as much in my DNA. Maybe a lot of your listeners are sellers. So negotiations more in the blood and the bones and everything like that. For me, it was a learned thing. And for a lot of people, it's got to become a learned thing. So I just, consume a lot and pick and choose and cherry pick and use the things that I think work best. And then that gets into experience. So I've just got a lot of experience doing this. And lastly, the mistakes piece. Like I've made a lot of these mistakes. I've learned from, leaving a lot on the table. And that's what I'm out here trying to help other people avoid. So, I mean, it's kind of those three pieces. But yeah, I am much more a marketer by trade. I was always in that sort of track, although I did, lead BDR teams and very closely worked with sellers. But that's why I'm excited to be here and kind of put on my sales hat for a while and talk to your folks who I realized too that you were saying like a lot of the people who listen to the podcast are reps or like coming up and aren't really quite at the senior leader level or CRO level or VP sales level or whatever. But I do think a lot of what we talk about today is going to be relevant as well for them because it's, to your point, a mindset thing. It's getting ready for that. It's getting educated on what to expect next. And, compensation is just such an interesting topic anyway. I think everyone's going to get a lot out of this. And whether they can apply it today or tomorrow, they'll apply it at some point. So bookmark this and have it in your back pocket.
I think one of the beautiful things that you've done is you've gone through the experience and, dare I say, the pain of it yourself. Mm-hmm. And so often when I see, whether it be a rep, a leader or founder, venture into a new career or coaching people, mm-hmm. I see too many people do it before they actually have gone through the experience themselves. They've mm-hmm. actually burned in the fire, so to speak, themselves to be able to teach people the lessons necessary through personal experience. And sure, there is an amount that you learn through studying, through, watching YouTube or whatever, your mm-hmm. source actually is, but there's nothing that can beat. I've been there. Mm-hmm. I'm still in it mm-hmm. in certain types of ways. And let me just simply teach you that. And so that's mm-hmm. one of the things I think that gives you a lot of credibility around supporting people with compensation is like, hey, you were a senior leader and marketing leader in various types of capacities. And so you've been doing this.
And I mean, a startup is very different from a public company. So what prepared me in the early stage company world definitely did not, translate all the way to the public company world. So it's like that spectrum too is important to get experience across. And I mean, now these days, I am fortunate enough to help a lot of senior leaders who send me their offers and comp packages. And I get to see a lot in different industries as well, which is just very interesting because, this isn't just a stage company thing. It's also like very dependent on market and sector and industry and all that kind of stuff. So, I want to get into the weeds here. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. So here's my first question for you. Before we get into the tactics of it, which we definitely will, mm-hmm. I really do believe that there's a strong correlation between how people negotiate well in relation to their self-worth, right? Do they actually view themselves to be worth it, right? Mm-hmm. Valuable, and to be able to receive mm-hmm. it. And I guess, how does self-worth really play into this? Like, is it needed? Is it like, how do you kind of correlate those two things?
Yes, like 100%. I look at it like a 3-pronged sort of thing where it's a what, how, why framework in my head, at least. It's like, do people know what they can negotiate? Do they know how to actually negotiate? And do they know why they should? And what you're bringing up is more the why piece, the whole like mindset. A lot of people are very confident and bullish and think they're, worth certain amounts. They're going to go and be ballsy and ask for that. Other people are the opposite of that. And it takes a while to be comfortable in that. And with the whole like why, there's a lot of fear. It's like a lot of people think, why should I even negotiate a job offer? Like, why don't I just take the first one? They don't want to seem greedy, or they're worried they're going to lose the opportunity. And the reality is just like none of that is true. It's incredibly rare that an offer is going to break down at the offer stage just because like you have the leverage. Like they are only making an offer to one person and it's you. And that's when the ball gets into your court. So if you're not used to that, and people don't negotiate job offers a lot in their lives, like, maybe more than they used to because people are hopping jobs a lot more, but still it's relatively rare and people don't get a lot of reps at doing it. So they have those insecurities, they have the fears, the self-worth is, maybe impacted by the last job they just had, they're coming off of, and they're looking to switch, and they're, a little bit desperate if they don't have multiple offers. And there are all those like factors that layer on to the whole, even desire to negotiate versus just like, take the first thing that's out there sort of thing. So that's what I help a lot of, especially more junior folks with is being okay with pushing back and never taking the first offer and realizing that, yes, it's incredibly rare that they're just going to yank it from you. And if they do, that's probably a red flag anyway, and you should dodge that bullet. So
have you ever actually seen anybody pull an offer based on someone trying to negotiate too hard?
I've heard of it. Very rarely. I've never seen it personally, and I've definitely never seen it at like the senior level. Like if that company has spent a considerable amount of time and money and resources like narrowing it down to that final candidate, like it's going to be a material expense for them to restart the search. They're already, bought into you if they're making you that written offer and all that. So I just have never seen it like out of the blue pulled. Of course, I can imagine situations where maybe people really blow it, like if they're way too aggressive or like, mishandle the negotiation or rub somebody the wrong way or whatever. Like I can imagine it would happen in crazy situations, but like realistically, it just doesn't happen.
Here's what I'll say. For every sales that is out there, you need to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a red flag for me as a sales leader if I hired a rep and they didn't negotiate their offer. Because at the end of the day, you're in sales, and a big part of sales is to be negotiating. And you need to stand up for yourself and for your worth. Most leaders or HR, whoever's giving you the offer, will put in some sort of buffer. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Devon. We'll put in some sort of buffer of this person's going to negotiate. So we need to at least leave ourselves some room within the band with which to be able to raise or to change or to do something along those lines. And so it's like, if you're a rep and you're hearing this and you get an offer, do yourself a favor and negotiate in some sort of way.
Yes. Yeah. I think this is why I like talking to salespeople, because it's, generally part of their mindset. And they realize that if I don't negotiate my job offer, that's going to look bad. Like, how do they expect me to negotiate with customers and prospects and all that? So, it is expected by and large. I think, again, the more senior you get, the more of a spectrum there is, the more things you can negotiate. If you're SDR/BDR, like it's probably especially at like larger companies, it's going to be a pretty tight kind of comp framework that you're working within. So there might not be like tons of wiggle room compared to other roles, but there are even like small things that I've seen the most junior of people negotiate, like from college grads straight out of school or interns. Like I've seen them negotiate gym memberships and payments on tuition or little stipends for this, that, or the other. Like the extra perks also add up. So, I mean, there is always, always, always room for negotiation. And if you don't ask, you don't get, kind of Jay-Z mindset there. Closed mouths don't get fed.
So let's now get into it, because I think it's like, all right, we're sold on, the why. They should like own your self-worth there. Now the question that I love you just said is how, and we can get into the what at some point, but like, how do you actually go about negotiating a better base, a better compensation, whatever it might be? What are the steps that one actually needs to be going through?
Yeah. So when I think about how, a lot of the time it's like coaching people on tactics. It's, most folks I work with, I would say like aren't in sales. So they don't, they're really newbies on like how to do objection handling and how to phrase things and how to, use ranges instead of single numbers or little psychology things of like maybe use numbers that end in odd numbers and not even numbers, or end in a zero. Like all those things are very like super tactical, but like super valuable. And again, I've like cherry picked these from different negotiators over the years. Chris Voss, I mean, is a master a lot of this stuff. If you've never read Never Split the Difference, I like highly recommend it or watch this thing. So I think like all of those really stack up to being better at negotiating. And those are cross-functional skills. Like you use those when you negotiate an offer. Great news, you can use those when you're negotiating with prospects and, you know, other whatever in your life. So I would suggest getting good at that whole list of things I just mentioned. And we can go into each of those if you wanted to. But by and large, like if you step back and think about like the high level process of negotiating an offer, I mean, generally you're going to get an offer typically verbally first. And I always strongly recommend like never accepting a verbal offer. Definitely never accepting like a first offer in general. And then like absolutely never accepting a verbal offer, because even if it's not legally binding in most places, it just, you lose a lot of leverage when you do. Like you're less likely to go back and renege and ask for more if you're like giving them all those positive green lights on the phone, right? So I always just tell people that first like offer, especially if it's verbal, just say, great, looking forward to seeing the details and I'll get back to you really soon kind of thing. And then, you know, ideally you do get that written offer, at least the bones of it in an email or something where you're, okay, now I've got something on paper and I can go back and forth on it. Generally, you're trying to agree on like the core parts of the offer first, like the cash comp, the base and the bonuses, and the equity, if that's a factor, kind of those like the meat and potatoes of it. And then once that's generally in place, you can layer on perks and sign on bonuses and like other stuff like that. I find is a good general approach. But yeah, I've got a lot of like, I don't know, some people just need a little help, like how to phrase things so they don't sound like a douche, right? So that's what I've spent like a lot of time is compiling like just nice ways of phrasing things rather than being too blunt and kind of newbie-ish with how you're asking for stuff. So I got a lot of that in the playbooks.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, is just like, how do you phrase it? Because, you know, I could see many, you know, whether you're rep, leader, executive, whatever it may be, just like, I want this. Mm-hmm. I want my compensate. I want my base to not be 150. I want it to be 200,000, or I want my equity to not be 5,000 shares. I want 20,000 shares. You know, It's like, what's the actual phrasing where it's more of like, hey, let's co-create a really strong offer that gets me excited to join your company? Because like, I'll even relate it to sales.
Yeah.
There were so many times when I would be negotiating with, you know, when I was at Outreach, when I was negotiating with somebody at the very end, and it was such a shitty negotiation that by the end I was like, F you, dude. like you've like really like made me actually not feel good about how we really try to support you through this entire process here. Like you just tried to like, you know, skin me for everything I got right here. And so you want the negotiation to make people feel like, okay, wonderful. Now we're so excited to have you here.
Yeah.
Like,
and
how do you get to that
especially with companies that you're going to work for, like they don't want to be the enemy. Like especially HR people get categorizes this all the time. Like they think they're the adversary and, you know, you're both fighting for these dollars or whatever. Like a lot of them want you to make as much as possible. They're just trying to, you know, operate within certain boundaries, right? So this should be, to your point, a very collaborative exercise to try and like win for both sides and make it something that's going to motivate you, because if you're, you know, performing, they're going to be winning, right? So I often we'll frame it in a couple different ways. So I would always talk about like the total compensation package. That's kind of like how I'd frame it, or total compensation, so that it's, you know, being inclusive of all parts of the offer. And if in the initial offer, there's something that is quite far from what you were expecting, or like something that just isn't making you that excited, I would just be direct and pleasant about it, but like don't pussyfoot. Don't beat around the bush. Just say like, I appreciate the offer. The stock options, for example, are significantly lower than what I was hoping. That's how I like to be motivated, by long-term incentives and getting invested in the company. So I would be expecting blank. And often that's very direct. That's like, oh, okay, he's not happy with these areas of the offer and he wants this. Let's find a middle ground that's going to work, kind of thing. So those sorts of talk tracks I like, which are, again, direct and like, this is lower than what I was hoping for. How about this? And then it kind of depends.
What I liked what you said there, just to real quick, it's like, I like to be motivated by this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's giving a little bit more of the why. It's them, you're saying, hey, make me really excited to really lean in and be here and be committed to doing the job effectively and making this company well. So it's almost like saying, like, let me help you versus just like, give me more money or whatever it might be.
That works super well, especially with equity and bonuses and milestone bonuses, the things that are actually going to make you richer over time, because, the cash comp, the base, everybody loses their minds over like 20K on base. And if you're, again, a senior leader with like a $200,000 salary, you shouldn't give a shit about $20,000 on your base. There's a whole long list of other things you should care about more that are going to add up to way more value over time. But people just like, lose sleep over, they, offered me 200, but I want 220. What should I do? And I'm like, you are being so short-sighted right now. Let's talk about those long-term incentives and again, back to the total compensation package, not just one or two elements. But then I mean, for other stuff, like travel's a good one. So like, everybody wants to fly first class, right? It's like, oh, that'd be nice. I'm going around to meet customers and conferences and all this. And they're like, I'd like to be at the front of the plane. How do I get that without sounding like a douche? And yeah, like green executives will just come in and say like, I'd like first class. Whereas it's more mature to come in and say something like, I would really appreciate for flights over 3 hours, premium economy, or for flights over 5 hours or intercontinental, business class. Like, that's just a a better way of phrasing it, a more realistic kind of expectation to set with them. I've even had people who are more junior ask if it's unrealistic to ask for business class on flights because you're, I don't know, not as senior as others, then they can at least ask for their boss to support those requests in the future. To like, look, I know we can't have it in the employment agreement, but there's kind of an understanding that when the time comes, you're going to do your best to help support those kinds of asks. And that goes a long way with the relationship. So there are creative ways of getting where you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. Even before like when you're talking with that recruiter, it's the very first conversation and they ask you, hey, what are your expectations around, an OTE? It's like, that's kind of a hard question because that could handcuff you right from the beginning. Do you have any recommendations that when somebody asks that question that kind of keeps the door open, I guess you can say, so that later on down the line, you still have an opportunity to negotiate for something higher?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always blunt on this. I'm like, never, ever, ever go first. Like, I will never throw out the first number. And this isn't just in compensation. This is like, in any kind of negotiation generally. Like, you want to know where they are so that you have the leverage after that. So, I mean, at best, the other side leads with a scenario that's higher than yours, and you're going to be able to get even more out of them. At worst, the ball's now in your court and you're going to have leverage. So if that hiring manager is asking for your expectations, I mean, I would just try and beat them to it. The more you do this, the more you're like, okay, I can sense that question's coming. Let me get it out there first and ask, what is the range for this role? What is the band? And trying to get that from them. If they come in first with it, or they like insist on a number, I'll just keep deflecting. Like, some people do this slightly differently, but I'll just say, like, look, I feel good about our conversations. I can't wait to meet more of the team. And I would just feel more comfortable doing that before discussing XYZ. So,
could you just flip it, be like, hey, if they say, hey, what is the band that you're explaining? Like, I guess I'm curious first before I answer that question, like, what is the band that you typically provide to somebody in this role?
Yeah. And sometimes you do that dance. Sometimes you like kind of are feeling each other out and trying to, play chicken a little bit. Who's going to go first? But oftentimes, again, general negotiation principle, whoever's more comfortable in awkward silences is going to win. So get real comfortable with shutting up, just floating something out there and then shutting the mouth. I love this. Like, apparently, this is kind of before my time, but on sales calls, apparently salespeople with like the polycoms used to just like say something and then hit mute. So they were like unable to say anything else. And it's so smart. It's just like people are so awkward and want to fill those gaps and silences with answers that they're going to start saying stuff if you just let them.
So anything before you actually get into the interview process, let's say you're talking to a recruiter, that you should be doing to almost plant seeds effectively to support yourself and having a good position here?
Sorry, that cut out. What was it?
Anything that you should be doing before you actually start the interview process? Let's say you're talking to the recruiter, that you should do to really position yourself effectively?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of, before you're going to be talking about money, to have sold yourself like a product to the point where like you are the one they want. Like, you need to make sure that they, to a point, at any price, are going to want to definitely bring you on. So for me, that includes like almost treating yourself like a product. So it's a positioning statement. Like, what are you going to be saying in your interviews with all the variety of people you meet to help them remember you and think of you as their number one candidate, kind of thing? So, for example, if you're like going in as a VP or interviewing for a VP of sales position or a director of sales or something like that, a crisp kind of like positioning statement would be something like, I'm an early stage VP. I'm going to go in, I'll get you to 25 million in revenue. It's going to take me 2 to 3 years. That's what I do. I've done it 6 times. I've consulted with 12 companies on it, and I'll help you get there too. Like, done. If you repeat that to everybody in the process and people think of you as the 0 to 25 million guy, that's going to be a lot better than other, Tom, Dick, or Harry with the fuzzy answers. And you've now positioned yourself as the 0 to 25 million guy, and the proof's in the pudding. You've done it 6 times. You've consulted with 12 companies, yada, yada, yada. So I think of it like that. I think like you want to be the top choice well ahead of negotiating any numbers.
Got it. So step 1, if you're interview stuff, just got to sell yourself extremely well.
Yeah, it sounds hokey. It sounds like, doing a whole positioning exercise sounds hokey, but I would pour myself a beer or drink a choice or whatever, sit down at night and write out that positioning statement. What are you as a product to this company? What proof points are there that underscore it? And any objection handling points that you can come in with and be prepared with is just like any kind of standard sales process.
So this is kind of the before and during the interview. Once you do get the offer, and then you're actually talking to HR more about like getting to the nitty gritty of it. I guess kind of 2-part question here. Is there anything else that you should be doing to position yourself extremely well? And number 2, what do people typically negotiate for? Like, I guess this is kind of up to each individual person about what they care about. I mean, is it base? Is it commission? Is it OTE? Or is it stock options? I want to build, first class,
Yeah.
RSUs. I guess, what do you typically see throughout the process there?
Yeah. So a little bit to what I said earlier, where you're trying to get your arms around the core part of the offer, the cash comp, the bonuses, the equity, the main pieces before you go and ask for all the like additional perks or whatever. But I mean, if we started at the top, like if you're right in the primo leadership seats, if you're CRO or SVP or VP of sales or whatever, there are a lot of elements that, especially if you're a first time VP or SVP or CRO, that you haven't been able to negotiate before. So this is where I help people a lot, where it's like, oh, this is now all the longer list of things that you can open your eyes to and try and ask for. So yes, there's, of course, base and bonuses and accelerators and your stock options or RSUs. But there's also now other elements like severance. There's other elements like special terms on your stock options or equity. There are other elements like, depending on the size of the company and the stage of the company, like, executive assistants and personal drivers and the gym memberships and dry cleaning and professional development stipends and all of those sorts of things that you can really sweeten the pot with, right? So I would say each of those areas has like a bunch of mistakes I've seen that we could go through and like talk about. But that's the whole like what, like that is by and far what I realize a lot of green executives have problems with, because they're just used to like their previous roles. Like if they were a rep, they're used to the typical rep comp plan where it's, some base and commission and maybe profit share or something like that. But now it's like what you can get way more creative with it once you step into the leadership role, right? So I don't know. Does any of that like what would interest your audience the most, I guess? Like where of those things would provide the most value?
Yeah, when I think about as someone who has negotiated as a rep or two reps or first-time leaders or people who are getting ready to go into their first director role or even be in that VP role, there's really like the three main things I always think of. It's like obviously the base and the commission.
Yeah.
And then there's the stock options. I think many people are very confused at what even are opportunities to negotiate within stocks.
Yeah.
You kind of even mentioned this earlier. It's like there's a big difference between a public versus a private company. There's a very big difference between a Series A/B or Series D/E.
Yep.
And then also even it's like, how do you negotiate future things? Meaning like, hey, if I do well here, right, what can I expect or what can you plan to? It's like, hey, I'm not saying just give this to me right now.
Yeah.
Let's say I freaking blow it out of the water, right? This is what I would really want. How do you think about those things?
Yeah. So, we could hit on all of them. Base and commission and bonuses and all that are pretty straightforward. With bonuses, I feel like we could spend hours and hours talking about all the different structures, but in general, I see a lot of common mistakes, which would be usually they're like way too low. I see single percentage bonuses, like 5-6% bonuses. And I'm like, how can those even be motivating a lot of the time? So you want to get to the point where it's like 20, 30, maybe even as high as 40% of your base or OTE should be that bonus kind of element. Often second mistake is like no accelerators. A lot of people like kind of have a capped on it or, don't get rewarded for overperformance, which again, might not be as much in the sales world because you guys are used to more of the commission stuff. So that's maybe for other folks. But then mistake number 3 would be more like the lack of creative bonuses in certain situations. So like there are like milestone bonuses, for example, where it's a really creative way to try and, to your point, think down the road of like, how could I incentivize myself and the company to earn big bonuses when we reach certain milestones or bounties. So like, for example, like if I help you get to 20, 30, $50 million in recurring revenue, cut me a check for 1% of that at each tranche or whatever. So, I mean, that's just something most people don't even think about, like structuring, right? So it's getting creative. On the equity side, this is huge. Like, this is the big elephant in the room. So many people are intimidated by stock options and RSUs and all that because they aren't founders themselves. They aren't like, they aren't VCs. They aren't dealing with this every day. Again, it's very rare that you're like having to negotiate this as just, average employee at a company, and they're not educated on it. So, they have no idea on what the right benchmarks are at all the different stages of companies. If you're, at that early stage and you're coming in as a, call it director or VP of sales, like there's a certain percent of the company that you can try to negotiate and get. Directors might get half a point to a point or point and a half. VPs maybe 1 to 2 points in the company. And to even know how much you've got, you have to know like total shares outstanding. Are people asking for that versus how many they're getting to like do that simple calculation? A lot of the time companies aren't going to give you that total shares outstanding. It's like pulling teeth to try and get it. So there's this like education piece of like, these are the things you've got to ask and the benchmarks you're going to try and hit. At later stage or public companies, often it's much more about like the ratio of the equity they're giving you to your base. So at HubSpot, for example, I know a few of the executives that work at HubSpot, and it's always like their top performers, they're trying to give like a 2 to 3x multiple of RSUs to their base salary. And again, does anybody know that benchmark? I had to make some mistakes to learn that. So like, this is what this is what most of the book is about, but I did not have these early on, and this is where most of my lost millions lies, in this graveyard of not knowing the benchmarks around equity.
So when it comes to equity, one thing that I think is always a little bit of a black box for many people specifically is, when does it actually, what's the right way to say this? Let me, Kevin, I'm going to pause here real quick. What the right question is, when you get acquired, and what happens to the actual shares when you're acquired? Do you know what I'm speaking to here? There's like a couple of options. It can like automatically vest and everything there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, acceleration and all that kind of stuff.
Is that something that you think will be valuable to speak to at all here?
Yeah, you could talk about that in terms of like, how do you protect yourself in certain situations? M&A is definitely like one of them. There are other scenarios like relocation and getting topped off and stuff like that. There are like mechanisms.
Okay. Do you want to talk? We can talk through that, and then do you want to take it any other way, kind of to finish us out?
I'll probably ask you a couple questions because I still am curious. What some of your little special moves are, and what your ideas are on certain compensation elements.
Cool. All right, I can ask you this final question, and then you can kind of ask me any questions there too.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So one question I have for you, Devon, and this is, I think, something that I've always struggled with, especially since when I joined Outreach, we were a Series C company. When I joined Catalyst, we were a Series B company. And, some of the, one of the companies was all about going public. One of the companies was all about getting acquired. And it was like, I had equity. Awesome. But then I didn't really know what would happen if we were acquired, right? Like what would happen to all of my shares. And there was the experienced sales reps that would tell me, hey, you should negotiate, what happens to the shares if we get acquired. But I guess, how do you think about that when you're, advising people on how to negotiate what happens to their shares? What are even the options? I'm assuming this is like a much larger topic that we could dive into, but from a high level, how do you think about getting acquired and what happens to your shares and what you should be negotiating from that perspective?
Right. Well, I mean, when people are signing that first offer with a company, usually they're being sold really hard on, what the future looks like, right? CEOs are great at painting rosy pictures. We are going to get acquired. We're going to go public, all this stuff, painting the dream. And that's what like software especially has been built on. It's like, everyone's got the dream of those options or RSUs or whatever turning into life-changing amounts of money. And sometimes they do, a lot of times they don't. This is why, I mean, you might have heard like a lot of people call stock options lottery tickets, right? Like, oh, be very careful. You're just like, don't bank on them, right? Like these are lotto tickets. And I do agree largely with that in terms of like you should optimize for cash and experiences, especially if you're younger in your career. Like, don't sacrifice a lot to, hang your hat on a dream kind of thing. But on the flip side of that, the only way to get truly wealthy at some point in your career is through equity, like large life-changing amounts of money. And there are a lot of people who have lots of great talks on this. Like Naval has his like how to get rich content, which is great. You should go check out. But anyway, so you've got, let's say you've got your stock options, your RSUs, your lottery tickets or whatever. And the best case happens, you do get acquired or go public or whatever. Generally what happens is that those become more liquid at some kind of like liquidity event, right? Like, okay, suddenly all these share certificates you have or stock options that have been collecting dust are exercise, like, well, not just exercisable, but like they actually have some, tangible
Some
liquid
substance.
value substance to you right now, right? So that is an exciting point. I think for a lot of, especially more senior people, I have a lot of folks who talk to me about trying to like protect their equity along the way. So this is a bit more of an advanced topic, but if you're more senior, there are options to negotiate terms around what are called like triggers, single triggers, double triggers, acceleration situations where if something happens, then all of a sudden all your stock options are going to vest and become available to you, or you're going to get a certain extra amount or something like that, depending on the situation. So, I mean, that can come in a lot of different flavors. And generally, I advise people to like consider the ones, because there's a long list of these types of clauses and provisions you can add, but it's like think of the ones that are most likely or concerning to you and then kind of gun for those if they're really important, like relocation, for example. Like some people, you might catch wind that there might be, I don't know, the office is moving or it's getting acquired and they're relocating it somewhere. And that really, like, you really don't want that to happen. So maybe there's a relocation clause, a double trigger that says, oh, hey, if the company moves your office outside of 30 miles, all your equity is going to vest or something like that. Same with like even like changing nature of your role or top off protection. Like if they bring someone in at the level above you and they kind of undermine you or whatever, there are ways to have clauses to accelerate your equity there. So again, more advanced topic, but there are definite ways to protect yourself. And I think most people should at least consider those because they're not really aware of them.
Here's what I would assume people should do is get your book, The Senior Compensation Bible. And there might be a few tips and tricks on how to actually check that out too.
Let me take 2 seconds to like pump this thing, because I think it is, it is the only book in the world, to my knowledge, that has helped over 1,000 executives negotiate over $1 billion in compensation. Like nobody talks about this. Everybody needs this, even if you're not even if you're not negotiating an offer today, to have it in your back pocket is why I wrote it. Like I wrote this thing a while ago, I left it collecting dust. Then I had an offer come up and I went back, I cracked it open. I thought, holy shit, this thing's good. Everybody needs this. It helped me. It needs to help everybody. So this will, like, I guarantee it. Like if it doesn't make at least a 5-figure difference in your offer, I will give you your money back. No questions asked, because I just so strongly believe in everybody trying to get paid, not played kind of thing. So yes, that is my hard pitch on the compensation Bible.
Hell yeah. Okay. Well, let me ask you this, Devon. One of the things you asked at the very beginning of this podcast is I want to ask you a couple of questions.
I do. Because I'm trying to learn. I want to learn from all negotiators.
Which gets me a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie, because I'm usually the one on this podcast who does the question asking, and usually other people
No. Tables are turning now, my friend. So this is my favorite part, because I'm a collector of little negotiation tips, tricks, secrets, secret moves. Like you've negotiated countless things in your career, I'm imagining. What are your little negotiation secret? What do you have any one-liners, little like tips and tricks that other people might be able to take?
You know, I learned this negotiation tactic, and I guess it could apply to compensation, but it definitely applies to deals. I learned this from a guy named Riley Devine. He's one of the best sales reps that I've ever had the opportunity of just being mentored by. And essentially, we call it the ping pong concept, where if you say, hey, the total cost of this is, let's just say $50,000, give or take. If someone says that's too high, and then you say another price, if in ping pong, right, you hit the ball 2 times in a row without the other person hitting it, what happens? You lose.
It's
right?
gone.
That's against the rules.
Yeah.
So if someone says, hey, that's too high, you should ask, cool, what is, within your budget specifically that you're looking for? Let's just hypothetically say, $40,000. If you're okay with that price, or if you say, if it's a little bit too low, you can always say, that's a little bit too low for our VP of finance to offer. Here's a specific line. Mm-hmm. If I'm able to go and make the ask for, let's say, $45,000, here's the key words. Is it feasible and reasonable? Is it feasible and reasonable to have this signed by this Friday?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not necessarily saying, will you sign?
Mm-hmm.
It's saying, hey, is it feasible and is that reasonable to actually have this sign? Right. And so essentially, if they give you the yes, that's essentially they hit the ping pong back and you slammed it down and you, so to speak, I don't want to say you won the negotiation, because hopefully it's a win-win for everybody involved there. But it's like, don't say the same price twice, or don't say that, your number twice, and make sure that you're not the one who's actually doing the negotiation. And I would assume that this could even apply to if you are actually negotiating for your salary or compensation of like, hey, I need to check with my partner if that's like aligned with what we're hoping to get for this. Right. So it's kind of taking the pressure off of you to actually being the one who has to make the decision right there and then on the spot.
I like that I like that because it's taking smaller steps to get to yes, like instead of having to rely on big leaps. But it's also introducing some urgency, like, okay, by the end of the week kind of thing. It's setting up that expectation. And a lot of times, I mean, urgency is very important. But also it's like with offer negotiations, it's kind of like, what's going to help just seal this deal? Like, what is, hey, I have another offer right now, but if you could throw in a $50K sign-on bonus, I'm comfortable signing today. Otherwise, I'm going to have to wait till the end of the week or something like that. And that little amount of urgency, or, how does that sound? Ping pong game can go a long way in helping it get done faster.
I like that. Yeah. my philosophy is I've just always loved negotiation. I don't know whether it's just because I'm in sales or I learned it from my dad or whatever it might be, but there's something about negotiation, whether it be about negotiating rent for my house or, you know, you name it, like something on Facebook Marketplace. There's just something about like, I love a good negotiation. And like the mindset towards it, it needs like your energy and needs to be like dig in versus like if you're scared about it, right? It's just going to start to come through. It's going to seep through. It's going to create leaky energy there. So like just whatever way you need to, it's kind of like you got to look to be punched in the face. It's just going to happen, right? Know that it's going to happen and just like accept it, but almost like look for like, oh man, if I get punched in the face, it's going to make me stronger. Right. In a weird effed up way, whatever that way means. But like that's just always been my philosophy.
More people need that. I mean, that makes me think of like a never tire mentality too. It's like often the first the one who's going to quote lose, even though it's not win lose, is the one who just gets tired first, who doesn't enjoy it, who just like throws their hands up or whatever. But if you enjoy it, if you get good at it, that's a virtuous cycle. It's like the better you get, the more you're going to enjoy it. The more you enjoy it, the better you'll get, kind of thing.
Exactly. Well, hey, Devon, I know that we're kind of up on time here in a second. So I just got to say, first off, like, thank you for spreading your wisdom and just for, I mean, this is just such a, like I said at the beginning, a black box for many people. They have no idea how to go about this. And I love just the phraseology that you put into here. I think that just like makes it approachable and actually makes it implementable for so many people. And so I guess I'd be curious if people do want to get a hold of you in some type of way or want to dig into your content, what is the best way for people to do so?
Yeah, well, first off, appreciate being here. Thank you. It's, the rising leaders, I hope, got a lot out of it. Is that what you call your listeners? Do you have a little groupie name for them or something like that?
I don't, but we can call them the future rising leaders. The
rising leaders. Something like that. Cool. All right. Well, I hope people got a lot out of it. If they want more, boardroomconfidential.com is the site where you can find all the stuff, the TikTok vids and playbooks and consulting services. And I'm going to launch a new community this fall, actually. So if people want to get hooked up with other executives, I'm really excited about that. We're going to put this together and make it kind of like an executive hotline and different from your typical community. So check that out, sign up for the wait list, and we'll see you around.
Wonderful. And remind us again of your TikTok handle.
That's Boardroom Confidential too. So
Boardroom Confidential. Okay.
That's right. Perfect. I don't dance or anything. Don't expect that kind of TikTok. But
I was checking it out the other day and I was like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing.
Maybe I should. Maybe that's the algo hack I need. But
you know what? I'm following you and I cannot wait to see you dance. I'd be like, I remember when you decided to dance on our podcast.
Alex, maybe do it. Painful.
Devon, I appreciate you, my friend. And thank you for all the listeners who hopped in here and have a absolutely wonderful day. Thank you, Devon.
You too. Take care. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Leader Podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you get notified every time a new episode releases. If you know someone who wants to take their lives and their career to the next level, send them this episode so we can all rise together. For more information, check out alluviance.co. We'll see you next time. And in the meantime, keep letting it flow.